Welcome everyone to the second day of our workshop, Digital Solution for Financial Empowerment of Overseas Migrants in Asia, which is co-hosted by ADB and the Hong Kong University of Science and Technologies. So today, on our second session, we have also a very exciting presentation, particularly focusing on interventions from the countries of origin, and also other presentations followed by a panel who are presented by researchers who has an extensive experience working in the field of the financial well-being of migrant workers. So we're very much looking forward to the event. Let me start this session just by just making a summary of yesterday's discussion, which had a number of interesting presentations. First, I think the presentation, many of the presentation really gave us a lot of insight on how we can build financial literacy that brings intended outcome of the financial goals. So, for example, the interesting presentation from Penella really indicated that we need to perhaps move out of classroom lecture type of approach that only focus on the knowledge or the numeracy, but goes beyond to really affect their awareness or the attitude towards a different financial opportunities or the services that they have. And I think from today's presentation, we would also maybe learn different approaches that can actually, bring that aspect of financial literacy to the migrant workers. And I think as a strategy to enhance financial literacy, we also learned from yesterday's presentation, especially from Camille, how some of the strategy to enhance learning, for example, through nudge, execution of financial plan, or having a good learning community and a positive peer pressure, which would encourage learning outcome to be realized. And I think presentation from destination country, Korea and Japan, really gave us an understanding of then what are the incentives behind migrants that remit or make decisions on how they would want their remittance to be used. So presentation from Ju Yong for studying about the Filipino migrants in Korea. I think it was very interesting to show that the migrants have a good, although abstract, goal of how they would like to use the remittance, for example, starting a business or having some saving target, but they do not have a concrete means to do so. And that based on such finding, they're really putting together a plan and a program that suit their need, and the incentive, gave much incentive to have a good take-up program. And I think also the presentation from Japan by Nobuyuki-san shows that a lot of the remittance still are based on the core incentive, and the core trigger of remittances lies in the altruism, and that those are very strong among temporary workers, which means that they have for sure the families back home. And this temporariness exhibit as a key important sort of magnifier of this altruism aspect of remittances. So then those ideas of the importance of altruism make us think that who should be training, who should be targeting in such financial literacy, and that is it just the migrants, or does the decision on the remittances and how we use it always involve us other than migrant? There's a significant others when remittance decisions are made. And we often think, tend to think in a short, myopic sense that remittance is owned by migrant. but this ownership of remittance is not often clearly defined or left for negotiation. And that the type of intervention that we would like to bring to empower financially the migrant workers always perhaps need to involve migrant as well as the family members. And those, I believe, are already confirmed to a certain extent by previous study, such as Doyne McKenzie, who experimented on the Indonesian workers, or Sisha and Yang, who also looked at the workers going to Gulf countries. They find significant impact on the financial goals when training the both end of remittance senders and also receivers. And lastly, but importantly, in this workshop, we're hoping to explore and also identify promising tools and digital tools that can further enhance the learning and the retention of the learning, as well as to connect what they have learned to the actual action in terms of the financial decision making, which lies on some kind of plan. So what kind of digital tools that are available were also discussed yesterday's workshop. And that in my presentation, I have shown that the time is ripe to really leverage these smartphones and other devices which migrants have a good command of to utilize that to empower workers through different types of interventions. What we saw from the presentation from John Sabre Asia is that I think they have done a lot of trial and error type of application development to make the application accessible and also convenient and also suit the need and also the technology environment of the migrant workers. So their presentation shows what kind of financial softwares or the application are best suited for a wider audience of migrants, which involve lighter application that are okay for different generations of the smartphones, or that it doesn't require 24 access, or what do you call it, the 24 hours connections, and that it can be done in their own time. The presentation from the Community Uplifters group also gave us a very interesting insight that the training can be done on online basis, and that there's a possibility to also give mentorship and the peer support online. And that the fact that the particular in the environment of the Hong Kong, where workers do not have a lot of free time, or their time they can dedicate for learning are limited, or their mobilities are restricted, online platform can be a very, very beneficial and a convenient tool for them to learn. However, it was also interesting to learn that these online-based tools need a lot of attention in maintaining its technical efficiencies. It was very interesting to learn that they have to upgrade their chatbot or other tools to be a par with the standard of Facebook or WhatsApp and so on, which are cost taking and also time taking. So we need to also weigh how we can balance between those conveniency, but also a lot of time required to update those tools that are needed to provide financial service and empowerment. So today in the subsequent session, we're gonna have 3 presentations followed by a panel discussion. And that the first 2 presentations come from the practices from the countries of origins. So yesterday we had many interventions from the country of destination, but today let's hear from a colleague from ILO and also from Atikha about their initiative bringing the financial empowerment of the workers from the countries of origin. So let me first invite Kat. Kat, if you'd like to start sharing your screen while I introduce you.
Thank you. Will do. Good morning, everyone. Good evening.
Okay, let me introduce Catherine Lowe, who is a technical officer of the Migrant Workers Empowerment and Advocacy Project and the Improved Migration Governance Project in Malaysia. And prior to that, she was with ILO's ASEAN Triangle Project. And she was also a colleague of mine. And when we're doing a remittance-related project in IOM, so really great to have her here to present. Kat, over to you.
Thank you, Aiko, and good morning again. And certainly, it's always a pleasure to collaborate with you. My presentation, as Aiko said, will talk more about the ILO's financial education programs as well as our platforms for migrant workers in ASEAN. So really focused on our work in, as she's mentioned, the countries of origin. But as you will see, we link this to, of course, our work with migrant workers in the countries of destination. In very interesting reflections and summary, Aiko, really good discussions yesterday, which I think my presentation will hopefully add to these discussions and, highlight also some of what the other presenters have already provided. I'm pleased to also see that John from Savor Global and Aileen from Atikha are here. So I'm actually going to be talking about our work in collaboration with Savor Global and Atikha. So we've heard a lot about the background, about remittances and the migrant workers' use for it. So I'm not going to repeat what's already been said and highlighted yesterday, but just to reiterate that remittances are an important source of income to migrant workers and their family. They provide for their basic immediate needs, and in the short term and in the longer term, we hear from our work that a lot of migrant workers and their families dream of being able to afford a home and maybe even be able to start a business with the money they're able to get from their employment abroad. However, we've also seen in our work, and I think studies have shown this, that many migrant workers don't actually meet their migration goals, and specifically their financial goals for migrating abroad. So we often hear this, what you call rags to riches to rags story, so how migration improves their financial conditions. But then when they go back home, we see that financial benefits are not sustained. And so, and then they realize they don't have savings and they weren't actually able to channel some of these remittances to productive investments. In looking into these issues, in terms of studies and actual, focus group discussions with migrant workers and as well as our partners, we've seen that, some of these reasons include that migrant workers and their families have insufficient financial literacy. I think we all know this. This is our discussion in the last, in the 2 days. But in particular as well, we see that this is also due to the high costs of migration. This includes high cost of recruitment, and where migrant workers and their family often have to take loans to be able to afford to migrate abroad. And a lot of these loans are informal. Many of them have high interests. So and for us in the ILO, we're also particularly concerned about this issue because it often leads to debt bondage and situations of forced labor. And at the same time, of course, there are also high costs to remittances, to sending their money back home. And in addition, so we were having a little bit of a discussion about the agency and the decision-making ability or independence of migrant workers. But we've seen that in our work that a lot of migration goals are unmet because migrant workers don't communicate adequately or plan adequately with their families back home to be able to come up with clear goals for migrating. So here we see that disseminating information about recruitment costs, also raising awareness about wage calculations, including how to calculate for overtime pay. And of course, information about spending, saving, and investment strategies, the formal remittance channels, as well as the costs for these channels and the services available, as well as, of course, and here we'll highlight a bit more, disseminating information about financial opportunities and services in countries of origin and in destination is critical in empowering migrant workers and their families to be able to make smart financial choices, and as well as mitigating vulnerabilities to debt bondage. There. So to address this, so the ILO has been promoting financial education among migrant workers and their families in ASEAN. So we've been doing this for years now, and in a more consistent basis. We've been doing it for at least 10 years now in all over the region. So our main strategies include increasing the financial literacy of migrant workers and their families. So we find it crucial to involve the families and not just the migrant workers. We also work with service providers. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. So building their capacity to be able to provide financial literacy programs. We've also started working on harnessing, the potentials of financial technologies. So again, our work on Savor Asia. And in line with this, then we also develop tools and training programs on financial education. So here, like I said, I'll be mostly talking about our financial literacy trainings throughout ASEAN in partnership with Atikha. And I'll be talking about as well our Savor Asia, our support to the Savor Asia online and mobile platforms. And so as I've mentioned, we've been working on this for quite a long time through, supported by various donors and through, implemented under different programs and projects. But currently our interventions are supported by 3 main programs: the Safe and Fair and the Triangle ASEAN programs, which are regional programs, as well as the Migrant Workers Empowerment and Advocacy Project, which is specific to Malaysia. So these are, are some of our key labor migration projects in the region. In terms of our financial education, partnership for us is critical. So we work with government agencies, particularly local government agencies, civil society organizations, trade unions, and and it's important for us that our partners are the ones that directly engage and provide services to migrant workers and their families. In addition, so the ILO has been establishing and supporting the operations of migrant worker resource centers all over the ASEAN region. And there you can see a little bit of this map. It's old, I think it's January of this year. So we've actually added quite a few. So we're currently running over 50 MRCs all over the region. And these centers actually provide migrant workers and their families with case management and legal aid services, very critical, information and counseling on safe migration and labor rights of migrant workers, psychosocial counseling. We do community outreach, and that's integral to some of our financial literacy work, as well as networking activities and referral to other services. And as I mentioned, embedded in many of these MRCs are trainings on financial literacy. And in Malaysia, we've also specifically been working on promotion in Cambodia, promotion of the use of the Savor Asia platform. So now I go to our financial literacy program. So as I've mentioned, we've been running this for a while, but the current iteration of ILO's financial literacy program is being implemented under the Safe and Fair program in collaboration with Atikha. So different iterations have different focus areas and different scope. But so with our current program. So we've been working to update our existing financial literacy tools. So every couple of years, we update this. So we conduct focus group discussions in our target countries and, of course, our target provinces and migrant communities. The Safe and Fair program is very specifically focused on empowering women migrant workers, and it's also under the UN EU Spotlight Initiative on eliminating violence against women migrant workers. So we're also addressing economic violence against women migrant workers. So our current tools have a specific focus or are added components on women's empowerment. So really raising women's voice, strengthening their choice and agency. And we also integrate sessions, discussing gender and family dynamics, and of course also self-care for women migrant workers in the countries of destination. So in partnership with Atikha, we are also then so we started the work with the Atikha as the regional CSO partner. And with them, we identified frontline service organizations in the target countries. So currently, we're working in Cambodia, Indonesia, Philippines, and migrant workers from these countries that are working in Malaysia and Singapore. And so in all of these countries, we've identified a lead organization. So it's selected in each country to assist in identifying and managing the coordination of participating service providers in the countries. They also help us organize and co-facilitate the training of trainers on financial literacy. And then they also assist us in evaluating the training outcomes. So, and here below, you'll see just the names of our the lead organization in the different countries. And so, like I said, Atikha then acts, as a regional trainer, bringing up, their years of experience in providing financial education programs, and we're then training a host of organizations who can then, integrate this into their day-to-day programming, and then cascade this and conduct these trainings to migrant workers in the community. And through all of our, we've had a lot of lessons learned throughout the years, and we've noticed, some of our partners or organizations that we've trained before. I mean, there's always a lot of excitement and when we started. However, we have noticed that there is eventually some organizations that are not really able to sustain it. So for this iteration, we really wanted to look at low-hanging fruits or quick wins. And so we had a specific criteria for identifying participating organizations at the country level. So we wanted to make sure that they have a track record in already providing programs and services for women migrant workers and their family. So having that network and community engagement was very important. And so having access to large numbers of women migrant workers and their families was important, because then we notice sometimes that in as much as they want to provide these trainings, they don't know how to find migrant workers. So that's been also a challenge in the past. And, we also wanted organizations that were already engaged in providing trainings for, primarily also trainings to women migrant workers already in their families. Also, organizations that already engage in multi-stakeholder partnership. And last but not the least, we wanted partners that were willing to mainstream the financial literacy course into their existing services. And we are looking into integrating this into pre-departure and or post-arrival programs, reintegration programs as well as economic empowerment programs so we're looking at it throughout, providing these trainings throughout the migration cycle. There was discussion yesterday about when do we conduct these trainings. But for us, we wanted to be able to target prospective current and returnee women migrant workers and their families. So once we identify the partners, then we conducted the training of trainers to these service providers. And then once they've been trained, so Atikha does a long, mentorship about, now we're looking at 2 years. And so they're mentored as they then cascade these trainings to migrant workers and their families. So when we conceived of this and we started, talking to Atikha, I mean, we were still, I'm sure, in the midst of the pandemic. So a lot of the trainings were actually originally intended to be online, but as much of the implementation happened this year, we actually got a lot of feedback, from participants from these organizations who expressed strong preference for in-person trainings. So eventually we adjusted, and we then conducted hybrid trainings. And again, there was a lot of focus on empowering women in these trainings. And then in addition, something that we haven't as focused on as much, we worked a lot on promoting cross-border interventions. So so cross-border interventions, supporting the collaboration among our partners. So supporting, like I said, the education throughout the cycle. So linking, Philippine trainers to Singapore trainers, for example, as well as, and this is important, we wanted to link migrant workers to financial service providers, as well as, provide them information with what economic opportunities they have in their home communities. And so recently, Atikha actually just a few days ago conducted what they call a marketplace events, where local government, financial institutions from specific provinces where they found that many of their migrant workers, for example, came from. So they came and spoke and just provided, what was available in these hometowns. So just as a quick update of what we've done. So again, implementation was mostly done this year. So we actually developed a new set of learning materials, and of course translated this and contextualized this to Cambodia, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, and Singapore. And this is quite interesting because we, in the midst of developing this, we realized, and I think Aileen might speak a little bit more about this, that we needed to develop additional materials that catered to Cambodian migrant workers and migrant families with low reading and writing literacy. So, I mean, basically, these were like community-based organizations that basically said, a lot of those who would be attending these trainings don't read, don't write. And at first, when we heard this, it's like, how are we going to do a financial literacy training? And through a lot of discussion, brainstorming, we developed additional materials, so video and audio materials. So instead of them going through some of our training manuals and reading through loads of case studies, we then transformed this, like I said, to AVPs. So for this year, Atikha has trained about 154 staff of participating organizations. And these organizations, 15 of them, have already started providing these trainings to migrant workers and their families. And as of this year, so I think most of this was done in the second part of this year. And this is as of August, so 510 were trained in Cambodia, Philippines, and Indonesia, and 141 women were trained in Singapore. So as of this report, our Malaysian counterparts had yet to implement. And 2023, we're looking to continue our mentorship of existing partners, and we're going to continue some focus on our cross-border links. So among our partners, and as well as our migrant families and the financial opportunities. We're also going to focus a lot on sustainability. So integrating, as I've mentioned, these trainings into the regular programming of participating organizations, ensuring that they're able to, they have the means to do this. But also there's been a lot of interest generated from our work, and there's been a lot of discussions on wider institutionalization. So for example, in Indonesia, our MRC model is tied into the office, the one-stop office that they have in Indonesia, which are the local government offices that actually process contracts, review them. So basically work with all the documents needed for migrant workers to be deployed abroad. And what we've done is that we've integrated the MRC functions to these government services. And through these MRCs are then conducting the financial literacy in our target province. And there's been interest from the Indonesian government to expand this and to ensure that other one-stop shops provide similar services. So something that we be focusing on.
Sorry,
And
Kat, to intervene, just allow for more discussion. It'd be great if you could wrap up. So thank you.
okay, sorry. Okay, so maybe then just to highlight.
But I see, yeah, this part is quite important. So do spend some time. Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, do I just wrap up?
I don't know. I see this observation part quite critical for the audience. So do focus on this, then maybe we can move on. Yeah,
sorry, I go a little bit out of time. So I have these observations for financial literacy, and I also had some observations about our Savor Asia work. So maybe you've heard a lot of what John has already presented. So maybe I'll just talk about this, and then some of our observations with the Savor Asia. So here we've noticed in our work in financial literacy, it's been really critical to engage local and community-based organizations who are directly working with migrant communities, and it improves the dissemination of our services as well as access, and including effective translation into the languages and contextualization to the needs of the community, not just even in the country. It was, so again, like we've said, it was important to engage not only migrant workers, but also their family to ensure they can, do goal setting, budgeting, and addressing some of the family financial habits. And it's not just the individual migrant worker, as I think we were discussing yesterday. And so it wasn't enough to just provide the trainings to increase the knowledge, but in order to support changes in their behavior, and to really encourage them to save and invest, we saw that migrant families needed to really be linked to financial services and opportunities. And that was always the question after the training. So now we have the skill. What do we do with it, right? We also saw that online engagement was important, particularly during the pandemic, and creating these cross-border links with partners. It had widened the avenue for engagement, but we saw that in-person trainings remained crucial, especially in engaging and effectively training the migrant communities themselves. So participatory approaches were more effective than video learning alone. And there was also a lot of question about inclusion. So we talked about, the Cambodians who had low literacy levels. So there's always a challenge in how do we, better engage these specific, target groups. And so here, I think I said John had already presented Savor Asia. So just to point out that we have 9 remittance corridors in ASEAN. It's available in Bahasa, Indonesia, Burmese, English, and Khmer. And I'm going to go over this, and so skip through this. These are some of the we were talking about use and access yesterday. So I actually had pointed out, just highlighted some of the use. So you can see over 150 unique users now, over 1.3 million reached, and then over 2 million video plays. But so going to specifically to observation. So in terms of our work with Savor Asia, we saw that most low-skilled and medium-skilled workers have phones, but not all, and others may have limited access. This has already been highlighted by Aiko again today. And we also noted that migrant workers face restrictions in using mobile phones. That's something to consider. Not everyone has this. Some employers restrict phones, and there's also gender dynamics. So we see in Myanmar how men often have more access to mobile phones, while women, there are still restrictions in women owning their own phones. So we talk about self-help programs to teach how women can conduct informed mobile phone negotiations. And we also realized that migrant phones, could be simple. So we were recommending that digital skills need to be compatible to the phones that they have and take into consideration the limited access. Also, of course, making sure that these services are available in their languages. And again, keeping in mind that not all migrant workers are literate. So looking into different options. And we also saw in terms of our work with the overtime calculator in Malaysia, what was interesting was many of these workers realized they were underpaid, and they eventually then sought assistance from our partners, our MRCs, to claim their due wages. So, there's a trickle effect in terms of their empowerment. And last and not least, again, I said that in-person outreach, education, and support services remain important. And from our experience, at least, we've seen that we really can't be replaced by digital services only. So we need to collaborate with CSOs and workers' organizations, and specifically migrant associations. Migrant leaders are important. And promoting these online and offline services continuously through social media is the biggest way we can get their attention. And as well, critical, we found the success is that we promote the use of these mobile technologies in networking and organizing migrant workers. And you could see that Savor Asia, the use was particularly high in Malaysia, where we are working with these community-based organizations, trade unions, etc., who advocate for the use of Savor Asia in these networking activities. Thank you so much, and sorry I I went over time.
Thank you, Kath. I think your observation part on the financial literacy, as well as the specific use of these technologies, are extremely useful for many of the participants here. So just one quick question on your coverage. One question is that, is there any partners in Hong Kong? And I also maybe add that how about the Lao PDR? Thank you.
Thank you. So currently, so again, the current iteration of our financial education doesn't cover Hong Kong or Lao. Lao, we've done so in the past. So we do have partners there that we've trained. Although there is a interest to revisit that and maybe expand our initiatives in Lao, but also Vietnam and in Thailand.
Okay, thank you, Kat. Now we move on to the next presentation. We have heard so much about the work of Atikha through different organizations. So Aileen, if you could share your screen while I introduce you. So Aileen Constantino-Peñas is the executive director of Atikha, and she has done an extensive work through the work organization of Atikha to promote the financial empowerment related work, especially starting from the Laguna area of the Philippines, now expanding to the whole Asia and perhaps conquering the world in the coming decades. So I give the floor to Aileen. Thank you for your participation.
Yes, thank you so much, Aiko. Thank you, ADB. And of course, thank you, Hong Kong University, Sujata, for arranging this and for having Atikha in this occasion. So I will be presenting economic empowerment of migrants and families, which is the experience of Atikha that Kat mentioned earlier. It is also good to follow the presentation of Kat because Kat was really instrumental in the development of modules of Atikha since her days in IOM and now with our project with ILO on enhanced financial literacy. So first, let me introduce our organization briefly. Atikha is a community-based non-government organization. Although our logo and our name is written in all capital letter, this is not an acronym. Atikha actually is a Southern Tagalog word or a local word, which means to save little by little or to invest. And Atikha is a 26-year-old NGO as we were established in 1996, headed by the migrant returnees themselves and religious leaders in San Pablo City, Laguna. Laguna is the next province to Manila on the southern portion, and that is about 1.5 hours away from Manila. And San Pablo City is one of the cities in Laguna, in the province. So as I mentioned, Atikha is not an acronym, but from the name itself, it entails to save and invest, because we are an offshoot of a study, and most of the migrants that participated in our research in mid-90s, they mentioned that they work overseas because they said this way, gusto kong makatikha ng bahay, makatikha ng lupa, at makatikha ng pampaaral ng mga anak. In other words, I want to save and invest for the house, for the lot, and for the education of the children. And from there, we coined the name of the organization, Atikha. So our mission is to harness the positive impact of migration, at the same time to address the negative impact of migration. This is about maximizing the gains of migration and minimizing the social cost of migration. So by harnessing the positive impact of migration, Atikha provides training and link the migrants and their families to services to enable them to save, invest, and engage in business. While as we minimize the social cost of migration, Atikha assists migrants and families in preventing and addressing the challenges of long-term separation and negative impact of remittances by having several trainings and mentoring session with the migrants and families. So the financial literacy training, or the financial literacy campaign of Atikha, has been there for more than 2 decades actually. We conduct financial literacy training for almost 20 years, and we are doing this not only to the land-based migrant workers, but also to the sea-based migrant workers. As you can see in the picture, the upper portion is for the land-based, while the lower portion is for the sea-based. So we were conducting that for almost 20 years. And our modules are designed to address the mission, which is to harness the positive impact and prevent the social cost of migration. And earlier, I mentioned that we should go beyond the numerical way of having the financial literacy program. So with our modules, we are having this for 8 to 16 hours, which is around 2 days. And this is not mainly lecture discussion, but we are having several methodologies in conducting the training, such as games, workshops, and group sharings. And through this kind of methodology, as Kat mentioned, there are migrants who needs additional way to, or creative way for them to understand what financial literacy is all about. So rather than having the conceptual way of telling this is the way to save, we are presenting some pictures. For example, is this a need or the want? Especially for the Cambodian migrants. So sort of that, we have several games and workshops so that the financial literacy will be more interactive and not boring. And we conduct a financial literacy being integrated to other services needed by migrants and families. So it is not, it can be a independent module, or it can be an independent activity, and it can be merged to other activities for migrants and families. Ideally, based on our experience, ideally, the migration and reintegration journey of migrant goes like this. First is, there should be a goal setting as a family, and there should be a discussion on shared responsibility. So they need to set goals, and of course, they need to talk about the roles of each family member to reach the goals that they set. And there is a need to discuss the gender equality and sharing of responsibilities among family members. And it was highlighted earlier by Kat that there is a gender dimension integrated in all our training programs. And then after that, there should be a financial planning and a smart spending discussion. So we discuss family budget and contribution of each family members in terms of financial management or income management. And then not only about the concept, but there should be discussion on save and learn the different business and investment opportunities available. And we take into consideration that those opportunities, business, investment, and saving packages are available at the local level, or meaning that is accessible to the OFWs and families. And after those trainings on financial literacy, we are also considering that there should be skills training to equip migrant and families with skills for job or business, or for skills upgrading, or maybe for additional income for the OFW on the countries of destination, because even in Hong Kong and Singapore, there are skills training provided by different partners. And in the Philippines, there are skills training at the local government unit level. And then, ideally, for those who are interested in business, there should be an entrepreneurship training to learn to start business as soon as possible if this is their integration plan. Meaning, if they are interested to business, then right away they should start the entrepreneurship training. Maybe at the time that they are still abroad, or their family members are left behind, who are left behind, are also being retooled or being enrolled in this kind of training, so that they can prepare on the entrepreneurship or the business that they want to be engaged with. And then lastly, ideally, they will retire. Some of them will be go back home for a job. Some will start a business, and some are ready to give back to the community. So this is the ideal situation, or the ideal migration and integration journey of migrants. And considering and understanding all these needs, we came up with step ladder training program. So why step ladder? Because the OFWs are of different needs. And another thing is, we want to start the education to them even before they leave the country. We want to have the goal setting and financial planning with the migrants and their families during the pre-departure stage. And to provide this stepladder program, Atikha is in partnership with the different stakeholders, migration stakeholders in the Philippines, particularly the Overseas Workers Welfare Administration, through the National Reintegration Center Office, the Department of Agriculture, Department of Trade and Industry, Department of Science and Technology, the TESDA, or the Technical Education Skills Development Authority, the local government units, the OFW organization. We are also in partnership with banks, cooperatives, and other foundations in providing the step ladder program. So talking about the step ladder program, we have the first step. This is the pre-migration orientation and financial planning. Meaning, this kind of training is designed for the migrants and their families, and it should be conducted at the community level. So they will be together with their family members during the pre-departure stage, even at the time that they are still thinking to migrate. So that is the first level. And then the next one is migration and financial planning. It can be done at the countries of destination if they are already there, or maybe even before they leave or before their departure. And it can be done with migrants alone and with the family members also in the Philippines. It can be in it can be in both sides of migration corridor. And then after that, we have this our integration planning and mentoring, which also includes referral. So when we say integration planning, we ask the migrants what are their plans and until when they plan to work overseas. So what are their plans when they come home? How will they prepare? So we have this kind of session. And then after that, we have the module 4 for jobs, investment, and business forum. And it is called marketplace event. And it happens in both sides of migration corridor. So we have the connection with the provinces of origin and then the destination countries. And then after that, the skills training or upskilling. And lastly, for those who are interested to engage in entrepreneurship, we have the entrepreneurship training and mentoring. So that is the step ladder program of Atikha. And then for our lessons learned and recommendation on the implementation of the financial literacy for the last 2 decades, first, it was mentioned earlier several times, financial education should start from goal setting and financial planning as a family before migration. So the idea of saving, the idea of having set the goals should be prior to migration, and it should be a work or it should be a decision of the family. So the migrant and the family should work together for this. So there is a need to conduct pre-migration orientation seminar and financial planning for migrants and families prior to work abroad. That's why we encourage to mainstream this at the community level or village level so that we can capture the prospective migrants and families. Next one is financial education should address the root cause of lack of savings of the migrants and families, meaning it should tackle about family dependency and family issues. Therefore, the strategies in addressing family and dependency issues such as learning to say no, preparing the family for migration and reintegration, and the gender-responsive household by sharing family and financial responsibility should be well taken in all the financial literacy program. Because without this, it will be impossible for the migrants to say no. And most often than not, it is the reason why the migrant can't able to save, because their savings are being drained by the family members. That's why we need to have the following strategies. Then the next one is financial education should involve not only migrants, but also family. And it should be on migration corridor approach. Meaning when we say migration corridor, we should engage the provinces of origin or the key stakeholders in the provinces of origin, as well as the key stakeholders in the destination countries. Therefore, there is a need for the training of trainers with the local government units from the provinces of origin, with the non-government organization, with the migrant organization in the countries of destination, and other stakeholders in both corridor. This is the strategy to engage or to reach both the migrants and families. And lastly, financial education alone is not enough. This is mentioned by Kat. Migrants and families need to be linked to additional services to assist them in paying debt, saving, investing, and entrepreneurship. Therefore, there is a need for multi-stakeholder approach involving national government, local government, CSO, and private sectors to link the programs and services that they have to the migrants and families. And fortunately, with Atikha, we are instrumental in the organizing of Committee on Migration and Development at the regional level, in which this committee is the one providing the services, the direct services and programs to the migrants and families. So altogether, they count for the menu of programs and services for our OFWs and families. So for our ways forward, we will evaluate the outcome of the economic empowerment program to improve the services to migrants and families, and to see what else we can do, what we can improve, what we can work on. Also, we're lobbying for the institutionalization of the pre-migration orientation seminar and the financial planning for migrants and families. And we have this lobby work with the Department of Migrant Workers so that prior to migration, they will be more prepared. This is aside from the regular pre-departure orientation seminar, because this one is really designed for the goal setting aspect and for the shared responsibilities among the family members. And then the third one is the mainstreaming of reintegration and financial planning in the training programs for migrants and families, which can be considered on the PAOS or the post-arrival orientation seminar of embassies and consulates and other CSO partners in the countries of destination. And lastly, we want more training of trainers for national and local government, civil society organization, and other stakeholders providing services to migrants and families on both sides of migration corridor so that we can multiply our reach. So that's it for Atikha's programs and services. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aileen. It's the recommendations you have, but we hope to work with you in some of those initiatives. We have one comment and one question. So one was a comment from one audience saying that maybe a follow-up session would be good. If there's, interest, we would do that. And there's a question from Kijin. What are the gender-specific training component in your module? And there's another question, so maybe I just raise. it would be good to see this program mainstreamed and that the scaled up, no? And have mechanism for continuous contact throughout the lives of OFWs. And her own Filipino helper just went through the preparation and that she realized that the financial literacy training is still minimum. So yes, I think the question would be that from your experience running the program, how do you see that your work being mainstreamed to a bigger set? So those two questions, over to you.
Okay, for the gender-specific training components, we actually part of the training program is a module on gender sensitivity and shared responsibility for OFWs and families. So in that portion of our training, we have a workshop on what are the role changes within the family when somebody migrates. And we also tackled about who assume the role changes and how can be those changes be coped by the left behind family members. And there we promote the shared responsibilities among the family members, and also we provide strategies and tips on how they can cope with the separation or with the absence of other member of the families. So that is for the gender specific training component of the module. And aside from that, all the gender aspect is being mainstreamed in all the modules. So the promotion of shared responsibilities is there. And then for the mainstreaming, our strategy is conducting training of trainers. And in conducting training of trainers, we engage the local government units, meaning the frontliners, the key stakeholder at the local level. While in the destination country, we engage the people from the embassy and consulates, particularly the POLO, or the POLO is the Philippine Overseas Labor Office representative, and the welfare officers in the destination country, so that they can be also equipped and this kind of training, and somehow they can assist on the promotion and implementation of this training program. Did I answer yet? You're muted, Aiko.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think TOT is a good way to scale up, and that as Kelly suggests, to have a continuous support throughout, so that this TOT trainer can actually practice and also really make this a regular feature of the government services would be something that the is interested to really push that model, because that's the ultimate where migrants can always avail of those services before they make decision to migrate. So I think Atikha's work has really seen and scale up over the past decades, and that we hope that would also amplify. And it's really great to see that work also being cascading to other ASEAN countries, which needs very much this kind of model. So thank you very much, Aileen.
Thank you.
Now I move to the next presentation by Sujata. And so if Sujata can be ready to project your work. And Sujata, who's also co-organizing this event with us, is an associate professor of economics at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology Business School. And she's also the director of the Center for Economic Policy. And she has done a number of work already on domestic workers in Hong Kong. And that's one of the work she would present today. Sujata, over to you.
Thank you very much, Aiko, and thank you to everybody who's in this workshop today. And I'm looking forward to your questions and the further discussion going beyond that. So this is called Migrant Domestic Workers, Financial Choices and Possible Solutions. This is, as Aiko said, based on research that I have done in Hong Kong and specifically focusing on Filipino domestic workers who work in Hong Kong. And that is mainly what I will be speaking about. This is work I have done in collaboration with many different people over several years. So I will try and explain all of the different, or give credit to all of the different people who've been involved in this as I've gone through this sort of journey, if you like. So a little bit of background. I've been in Hong Kong for about 13 years now, coming on 14 years, and have been involved with research on migrant workers and also some voluntary service for migrant workers for a while. So I helped to lead a savings and credit cooperative in Hong Kong that serves migrant workers for many years. I've done multiple exploratory research projects, both with students and faculty colleagues, and there's a couple of papers that I've written and some ongoing work, including with Lucy Jordan, who I think is here attending as well, and Aiko. So I think we know this by now, and this has been discussed several times here. Migrant domestic workers who come from the Philippines to Hong Kong, I think of them as economic migrants. They're here, they come to Hong Kong because the wages are higher, and they expect that they can afford, they can create a better life, standard of living for them, for their families and themselves. And also it is just because of the legal restrictions, necessarily temporary migration. So it is very clear to migrants that they will not be able to get permanent residence in Hong Kong. And given this, we would expect that the economic success, the financial success of these migrants would be paramount, because that is really the reason why they go to Hong Kong. And as development economists, we have strong reason to think that migration might be a path out of poverty for many poor people in developing countries. There is some evidence from other contexts that this may be true. So for example, some very interesting work in Bangladesh kind of provides quite definitive evidence that seasonal migration increases consumption of the household at origin. There's also evidence that remittances increase child schooling and entrepreneurship, and there is some evidence that some of these effects might even operate in the long term. But at the same time as we have this evidence from sort of research, I think we understand less about whether these benefits are temporary or permanent. And Kat talked about earlier this rags to riches to rags story, and that riches to rags, the second part of it, is something that I think many people believe might actually be true of migrant workers in Hong Kong as well. And some of the work that we have done is really even trying to ask, you know, to what extent is this true? Is it really true that migrants, generally speaking, fail, or are there different stories here? And so my research suggests that there are diverse experiences. So we've done quite a lot of work doing in-depth interviews, both qualitative as well as quantitative, with migrant workers in Hong Kong. There are obvious problems with domestic workers in terms of how to get a representative picture of what their situation is, because of all of the issues with recruiting them into your study. But some things that are very common to migrants is education of their children or their siblings is a very, very high priority for almost all of them. And then other goals that we've talked about. They want to buy plots of land, they want to construct houses, or if they already have houses, they want to renovate them. And then often they say they want to start a small business. I think we've already discussed this. But at the same time that we hear from migrants that they have successfully achieved these things, we also have other evidence suggesting that not all migrants are succeeding in quite the same way. So for example, the National Migration Survey done in the Philippines, which is a representative sample of return migrants, 34% of the specific ones, so we zeroed in on those that had come from Hong Kong, had returned from Hong Kong and said that their job in Hong Kong was domestic helper. 34% of them, when they were interviewed back in the Philippines after they had returned, said that they could not make ends meet. So this really does highlight what Kat was saying, is possibly the riches back to rags story for a good third of the people in that sample. So one thing that many people have argued might be the issue here is the high levels of debt that migrants take on. And this is something specifically that I have been interested in trying to understand a little bit better. The idea, of course, with excessive debt, given that in Hong Kong it is quite easy for migrants to take on debt, is that when they have excessive debt and then they default on this debt, then it has quite severe repercussions because of the harassment from the debt collectors and the fact that employers are not, generally speaking, likely to be understanding, so that they might eventually end up losing their job. And once they lose their job, the laws are such that they would return to Hong Kong, return to the Philippines, and that cuts off essentially their high higher wages that they were earning in Hong Kong. So like I said, money lending companies in Hong Kong, it is very easy to get loans from them for migrant workers. They often use aggressive marketing tactics. They do not require any collateral. So as long as you have a foreign domestic helper contract, you can essentially be approved for a loan. And the interest rates are on paper 2 to 3% a month. But if you actually sit down and do the calculations, I've had some conversations with people who have thought deeply about this question. They have pointed out that the interest rates on average are about 48% per annum. So very high interest rates. And so then the question really becomes, how do they repay these loans? And then why do they take these loans? Now, there is a lot of argument that the debt is something they are already in when they arrive in Hong Kong, and that it is taken perhaps as a result of lack of financial understanding or just not having any other choice. But some of the work that I did was trying to dig a little bit deeper into this. And this is also inspired by the fact that as part of the Savings and Credit Cooperative, where loans were cheaper, significantly cheaper, but you could only borrow if you had savings already. That was the model that the co-op used. We still saw quite a lot of borrowing. And it was interesting to try and understand why this happened. So the thing to understand is that the repayment for these loans comes from the Hong Kong salary, which, as you know, is a fixed amount because these are contracted jobs and is quite regular. So there isn't a lot of uncertainty about when or how much money they're going to get paid by way of salary. The benefits of taking a loan are obviously that loans are convenient and you get the money now, right? As opposed to having to build up your savings over time. But like I said, the costs are the interest costs as well as the risk of default and all of the repercussions that follow. So that in many cases, we noticed in the cooperative that really if these migrants had saved up instead and had not had to borrow, they would have been better off, financially speaking. So why did they borrow so much? This was the puzzle that I was trying to understand. And the question many people have pointed out is, is this borrowing for emergencies? But what we saw in our co-op is that that is not necessarily always the case. So 2/3 of the loan applications that we saw in our co-op were actually for what I'm calling projects, because migrants describe them as projects, which are expenses that they had foreseen and that they could have planned for, such as, for example, a child going to college or a house or something of that nature. And so when we dug deeper, what we discovered using these data from the co-op is that there was a significant amount of co-holding behavior going on. And this is a term that exists in the literature. And there is work by Carolina Loretti using data from Bangladesh, which also finds very similar results, which is basically when migrants are, and it doesn't have to be migrants, but when individuals are borrowing more than they strictly need. And so we could actually look in the cooperative data and see that people had taken on loans, even though they held in the cooperative savings, which were liquid savings, I want to point out, meaning that they could be withdrawn without any penalty, and they could have cut down on the amount that they had borrowed. So what this graph is showing you is that 62% of the time, the loan size, the amount that they borrowed could have been reduced if they had withdrawn some of their savings instead. And in 17.5%, they could have just avoided taking the loan altogether because they had exactly that sum already liquid available as savings in the cooperative and could have just withdrawn it. So again, this raises this question: why do people do this? And this is what led me to this idea of borrowing to save. And I put this in quotation marks because this is not my term. This is something that Jonathan Murdoch has actually written a paper about in 2010. And the point that he's making is that loans provide discipline, and this discipline is necessary if you worry that you're not going to be able to save. Why may you not be able to save? In many parts of the world, you might say that's because savings technologies are not available. And I'm going to argue that that is less of a concern for Filipino workers in Hong Kong. And if that is the case, then what could be alternative reasons why people need such discipline? One is, of course, temptation or self-control problems where, you intend to save, but when the time comes to save, you end up spending on something else because you are not able to control your own desire to buy something. But I think something else that and I think people have alluded to this as well, is your demands from your social network. And this very interesting work by Balan Gerkinger and Mali, this is now looking at cooperative members in Cameroon. And it's called Pretending to be Poor, because the idea there was many people had taken on loans that they strictly speaking did not need, but they borrowed from the co-op. And when they were asked why they did that, they said, well, if I have a loan, then people will think I'm poor and they will not ask me for money. And so this could be potentially an explanation for why people might borrow. And this is an idea that we took and we tried to dig deeper into. So the idea really is that loans might discipline spending, and the repayment obligation that you have allows you to basically claim credibly that you cannot afford to give money to other people because you need to repay this loan, and that effectively reduces the pressure you have to share with other people. So we tried to look for, being a researcher, we tried to look for hard evidence that this might actually be going on. And I'm going to very quickly walk you through the kind of complicated study we designed to try and see if this was the case. So we ran an experiment where migrant domestic workers came into our lab, if you like, and they could earn some money through performing a very simple task. And there were two different ways in which they could receive this money. So they were randomly assigned to either receive this money in the form of cash, or instead of giving them the cash, we actually went to their money lender and we gave the money lender that exact same amount and said, this should go towards the repayment of this person's loan. And then we gave the receipt for this payment to the migrant. So these were two different ways in which we gave them these lump sums. And then we again further randomized whether we told their family member that they had received this or we did not tell them. So this is the second part here where we're randomly either assigning them to told family condition or did not tell family condition. And we're doing this in both. And what we found, very interestingly enough, is that when we told the family, then the money got spent faster. So we had a way of tracking how the migrant was spending. And we saw that if the family knew that the migrant had received the money, then the money got spent faster. But what was particularly interesting to me is that it got spent much faster if that money had been given in the form of a loan pay down, meaning the repayment obligation had come down. And so what I took away from this is that there's something about having a repayment obligation, which you get by having a loan, unfortunately, that helps you to prevent demands from your family, possibly. And so this is something that we have done a few years ago, pre-pandemic, and we've been thinking about. More recently, however, we've done more work and we've interviewed many more migrant workers and tried to interview from a broader spectrum so that we're not just looking at those who are in debt, but also looking at people who don't have debt, because there are quite a few of those, even though perhaps we don't come across them as often when we're working in financial empowerment training. And one of the things I realized also is that loans can also exacerbate spending. And this came to me really once in a very interesting conversation I had with a migrant worker who was explaining to us how she arrived in Hong Kong because she was already in debt and she needed to make more money to be able to pay it off back in the Philippines. But how once she arrived in Hong Kong and realized how easy it was to get more loans in Hong Kong, and more importantly, when her husband realized how easy it was for her to get loans, he started putting pressure on her to take loans in Hong Kong. And the really interesting conversation we had was about how she had really had to muster up resources in order to resist that pressure to borrow. And so I think it's also important to recognize that loans also exacerbate spending. And when you have easy access to that, and especially when the loan is being taken by a migrant and the migrant is going to be responsible for paying it off and not the family back home, that can actually end up increasing the demands that people make on these migrants. So loans can work both ways, so that I would argue that this idea of borrowing to save, yes, I think it is a coping mechanism because other services are not available, and I'll get to that in a moment, but it is a costly coping mechanism. I think I've kind of established that already. But the other interesting fact is even that may not work for all migrants. And so I think, when we try to understand these choices of borrowing versus saving, it's important to look at this larger picture and kind of look at all of the nuance around how this might work. And so I'm just going to take it from here to talk about why I think the direction we need to go in is providing financial services. And when I say financial services, I don't just mean financial inclusion in the form of, connecting them to bank accounts and so on. And the reason I'm saying that is because what I have found in my research, especially working with Filipinas in Hong Kong, almost a very large percentage of them have checking accounts in banks already. Many of those accounts are in their home country or in banks that are in their home country. They often hold the ATM card. They are single accounts. They often hold the ATM card alone, and they do try to put money in there. And so I don't think simple access to checking accounts is where the gap is right now. The issue is, even if you have a checking account, how do you actually build up savings in that? Now, some research has tested this idea of commitment products or commitment savings accounts where you either commit to saving a certain amount or you commit to saving for a certain amount of time, and you're not allowed to withdraw your balance until either of these two targets has been achieved. But an issue that we found, and again, I'm drawing on my experience from the credit cooperative, is that liquidity is often a huge concern. And no wonder, because emergencies, shocks are a really important feature of these migrants' lives. And so they want to be able to withdraw money when they really need it. And if you tell them that it's going to be locked up, then that automatically makes these products less attractive to them. And so this is where I would say that what we really need is innovation in terms of how we design our services and how we design these products, where you want to create an element of discipline, because I would argue that is what is lacking. But at the same time, there needs to be some flexibility in whether they can withdraw or under what situations or conditions they are allowed to withdraw. And this is where I think, I don't have answers, but this is where I think that one might be able to leverage digital technology to create the accountability that we need so that such products can actually be effective. And I want to just say one more thing, which is that we often say, why do people not want financial education? Or people think that financial education, the benefits of that are uncertain. And so I think this idea of linking providing financial education along with providing financial services could also be part of the answer. And products like these could potentially be quite attractive to migrant workers. And this is where I think it would be really nice to be doing more research to test these ideas and to see how they work in the real world. That is all I have. Thank you very much. This is my email address. I would love to hear your comments over email, but also if there are any questions now, I'm happy to take them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sujata. We have two questions. One was on the term and the length of the loan, like typical length of the loan that migrants would take. Is it like, very quick loans because interest seems so high, or is it the long term? And another question is that when you talk about the debt, is it the one that is, do you also look at the debt made in Philippines, and that is it related to the migration cost, or they're indebted even beforehand?
So the first question is, they are not sort of payday loans, as at least I have not come across any of those. These are loans that are often for multiple months. So they get paid on a monthly basis, and they have a contract. So when they enter when they start a new contract, it's valid for 2 years. And so money lenders look at that contract and see how many more months this person has a job for, a guaranteed job for, and then often give them these monthly durations. So I've seen 6 months, I've seen 11 months, I've seen, maybe even 18 months in some cases. People who have a better credit record would get slightly longer durations on average and slightly lower interest rates as well. In answer to your first question, yes, there is debt that people seem to be taking on for sure before they arrive in Hong Kong. And Hong Kong is one of the destinations for Filipinos where it is actually not cheap to come to Hong Kong, but it is also still an attractive destination because the wages are relatively higher compared to going to Singapore, compared to going to the Middle East, for example. So a lot of the debt seems to be taken on at the time of migration, but even the story I told you where this migrant, she moved, the whole reason for her migration was that she was in so much debt to start with. So that is also something that happens.
I have an add-on question to this. What's the consequence of defaulting those loans, or that is the incident of default quite high?
So this is not something I have data on, but I would think that the default that there is default, and the consequence is the lenders, they have these collectors who then chase you. So there's often a guarantor for your loan who's another migrant. So she starts getting phone calls. You start getting phone calls, and then your employer starts getting phone calls. And then, the horror stories are where somebody actually shows up at your door. And there's a lot of harassment, essentially. And very often you hear of migrants then losing their jobs. They get terminated by their employers because they're just fed up with all of this harassment. So the consequences can be quite negative. Now, if a migrant were to just leave, I think she may be able to get away without repaying the loan. But I don't know that. I don't have numbers on how often this happens versus something else. But I have also heard of money lenders, and I even had a conversation with somebody who used to work with Prime Credit, whose big innovation was that he figured out how to chase them in the Philippines if they had defaulted on their loans. So this also I have heard of.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that consequences also affect how they would figure out this, debt to, borrow to pay kind of attitude, like as a end result, and they would, think about what's the consequence. So I thought it was interesting. Okay, thank you very much, Sujata.
Thank you.
We would have 20 minutes discussion following the panel discussion. So if participants have other questions, feel free to either throw in now or later, then we would answer them. So we go into the last session, which is the panel. So may I request the panelists to open your camera, and we shall start. So we have learned for the 2 days about the different more of a theoretical background of how financial empowerment might take place, or that what are the tools, what are the techniques to achieve them, and what has been actually done on the ground in the origin countries to destinations, and what has been the results, even if it's not, perhaps vigorously as we wish evaluated because of the different constraints. And we also saw how technology can bring some enforcement, or that can enforce some of the learnings in this regard. So in this panel, I hope we have 2 distinguished panelists who has a wealth of experience working and looking at the migrant well-being and the financial health. So to have a good understanding of how this scenery of the migrants' financial health has evolved over time and where we're going. So we're very glad to have 2 distinguished panelists. May I first introduce Professor Kimberly Wilson, who is the senior lecturer at the Fletcher School of Tufts University, and she's a senior fellow at the Lear Institute of Migration and Human Security. And that prior to this post, she has worked as a practitioner and research in the domain of financial inclusions. And I highly encourage you to look at her project website called Journey Project, which has many report and the case studies, as well as the message from the ground on how different interventions are made. And she has this site also carry a migration and the financial stories across the world, which might be interest for the Asian audience. We also have Professor Erwin Tianchon, who is the Professor of Practice and Deputy Director of the Global Human Development Program at the Georgetown University's Walsh School of Foreign Service. He has previously served as a Professor in Practice of International Affairs, Concentration Chair of the International Development, and Deputy Director of the MS Foreign Service Program. We also know that Erwin was a known economist at the World Bank and has published quite a number of studies, particularly on the well-being and the financial well-being of the Filipino migrant workers. So we're very happy to have both of you here. Thank you very much for joining. And perhaps as a way to start, I just give a free floor to you to introduce yourself or perhaps share your findings in this area. Over to you, Kimberly, first. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. And I'm really glad I was able to hear the last half hour because so many of the things I heard are similar to the findings we've had. So I'd like to start by saying that we've done research in a number of places in the Middle East, North Africa, East Africa, Latin America, and also very much in the United States. And the countries of origin have varied widely because and one of our findings, which is not unique to us at all, is that migration is often mixed, that you will see something start out as a forced migration situation. They'll be leaving their country of origin or their city of origin because of oppression, but they will end up becoming economic migrants. They are choosing countries based on economic opportunity. So leaving is not just enough. It's where they're going starts to matter. So examples are Nepalis, let's say, and Cameroonians leaving for reasons of caste oppression or conflict, but they're choosing a country based on economic opportunity. So they are going, in both cases, from their country of origin all the way through southern South America, through Peru and Ecuador, moving up South America through the Darien jungle, which is a 60-mile stretch of where even the Pan American Highway can't go. It is mile-high mountains and raging rivers. It takes about 2 to 3 weeks to get through that jungle. And then they're moving through Central America and up towards the United States so that they can have economic opportunity or opportunities for their children. It is really why they're doing that. So we're seeing that it can be mixed and not in all cases. And in another case, the Venezuelans fleeing economic meltdown in Venezuela, you could say they're forced to leave and you could call them forced migrants. But many are now going back and forth between the two countries, especially now that the Venezuelan is starting to dollarize, at least informally. And people are seeing opportunities, and there's much more crisscrossing going on back and forth across the borders for either small businesses or labor arrangements. So I will stop there before I go into some of our findings, because I would love to see what Erwin has to say.
Thank you,
so
Kimberly.
much.
Yeah, over to you, Erwin. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. First of all, thank you, Aiko, for the opportunity to join this discussion. Thank you for the very kind introduction. And thank you for the opportunity to share what I know about the theme of this conference, Digital Solutions for Financial Empowerment. It's also been great to learn from colleagues. I enjoyed the last 3 presentations by colleagues from ILO, Atikha, and Professor Visaria. In fact, as I was listening to Professor Visaria, I started reflecting on some of the lessons of experience from some of the projects I've been part of. And I think there are some opportunities there for brainstorming, responding to Professor Visaria's earlier point about discipline and flexibility and how should we think about financial services. So I'm happy to share some of these, some of these reflections later. But for now, following Kimberly's lead, let me just highlight, a couple of projects that I've been part of that are most closely related to, digital finance issues, let's say, that I will be drawing upon later in this session during my remarks. So 3 projects I wanted to highlight, and I would like to acknowledge the work of the people who led these projects as well. First, about a decade ago, I worked with Professor Giuseppe Di Archangelis and Mylinda Yoxi, both from the University of Rome, Dean Yang of the University of Michigan, and David McKinsey of the World Bank. And at that time, Professor Di Archangelis worked with leaders in the OFW community in Europe. At that time, we worked with a branch of the Bank of Philippine Islands, BPI, and we piloted a new financial instrument that we called EduPay. And basically, it was a new financial product that allowed migrant parents in Europe, working in Europe from the Philippines, to remit directly to schools in the Philippines to make sure that remittances were being used for their children's education as they intended. I will say more about this project, the parts that went well, the parts that were surprising to us, and upon reflection, some parts that didn't go so well. And my reflections on this experience, 10 years later, when we share more and we talk about how the landscape has changed and so on. Okay. The second project that I've been part of, and this is more recent, I worked with Toman Barsbay, University of Bristol, Vicky Liquanan, AIM, Andrea Steinmeier, University of Innsbruck, and once again, Dean Young of the University of Michigan. We ran a few field experiments in collaboration with OWA here in the Philippines, the Commission on Filipinos Overseas. One of the experiments we ran was a pilot of a new module on financial literacy that was part of the pre-departure orientation seminar. So it was just on a pilot basis. We added it to the pre-departure orientation seminar at that time. We are now preparing the findings for final journal publication. I think the results are interesting. Some are great, some not so great, and some very surprising. We followed about 2,000 OFWs or 2,000 migrant workers over time, some of whom were randomly selected to receive the training prior to departure, some of whom were randomly selected to receive savings reminders by text. So like on a bi-monthly basis, they're reminded, remember, this is your target savings. Remember, this is your savings goal. Okay. And then to see whether that mattered. And then finally, my third project, some years ago, I worked very closely with the founders of Remit Right. Don't know if you're familiar with that platform. This was created by Charlie Gillig and Patrick Aylward. Remit Right was a pioneer remittance comparison platform. It's no longer around, unfortunately. But what it tried to do in 2015, around 2015, 2016, was, I thought, groundbreaking. It was essentially a platform for comparing the cost of sending, let's say, $100 along a particular corridor, let's say between the US and the Philippines, across different MTOs or remittance transfer operators. And the insight is the differences in local currency terms of that $100 remittance could be very large, depending on the fees, some of which are hidden, and depending on the exchange rate used. Now, although Remit Right is no longer around, I think a number of institutions have followed in their footsteps. Finder, Monito, Save on Send. And again, I have reflections on those efforts. I'll share them later. These are the three projects I've had the privilege of being part of. I will be drawing from these experiences later in this session. Back to you, Aiko.
Thank you very much, panelists. Since we have opportunity to learn from your experience, which are quite long in time span, whereas people here are just looking at what's going on right now. So it'd be really interesting for us to understand how this landscape of financial information or knowledge that surround migrant workers or family changed over time. Do you see a lot of good improvement going there? Do you see how perhaps with all this technology that have changed, what do you see are the changing landscape, if any, or more pessimistically, you see not much of the effort being cascading or amplifying? What is your impression about the ongoing effort to enhance financial literacy across the world? So this question, maybe I first pose to Kimberly, then over to you.
Well, the reality is the landscape is changing in countries where the landscape is changing for everyone, not just for migrants. That's what we're seeing. So, for example, in the US, we have seen a lot of changes. So we are seeing people mixing their traditional savings systems, the rotating savings and credit associations, with some very high-tech solutions, and also banking. What we've seen pretty much in all places is that financial services co-evolve with expanding or diversifying income streams. So financial services first isn't really a finding that we've had. It's financial services second, except in the case of remittances. that people want loans, they want saving services, all these things, once they have income streams that are worthy of that. And so we actually have taken a financial health approach, which I think many of you are familiar with. And we use the UN's guidelines on that. So that is, can people meet their basic needs? Can they recover from financial shocks? Can they comfortably manage their debt? And can they pursue opportunities, either educational or business or what have you? And what we're seeing in many cases, the answer is no. In Jordan, for example, a country that sort of boasts a welcoming attitude, people have tremendous trouble meeting their basic needs. These are Syrians as well as Iraqis, Sudanese, and from Yemen. And the answer is they're barely making basic needs. And the way they're doing that is by borrowing from the local stores, the local shops. And so, of course, that puts them in debt. How do they pay off that debt? When they get their annual winterization grant from one of the UN agencies, whether it's HCR, WFP. They take that grant and they immediately go to the shopkeeper. So the landscape really isn't changing. What's changing is the providers are talking about digital solutions when that's the furthest things from people's mind. Digital solutions are not what they want there. They cannot recover from financial shocks, and financial shock could be a medical emergency, and it is in most cases, or somebody losing a job. The debt is, in many instances, I was listening to some of the interest rates you were talking about. For example, Venezuelans are paying 30% per month to prestamistas. And these people, we had lunch with them every single day. We're talking about the loan sharks. They hosted us. And they are also extremely poor. So because they're paying up the ladder, it's a whole system. So they're having a tremendous amount of trouble paying people back. And I heard you all talking about that earlier. We're seeing that as well in the US, that people are spending so much. Nepalis are spending $60,000 to get to the United States through that route I just told you about, that it takes them a long time to pay off that debt. Mexicans are able to pay off their debt in about 2.5 years. They start off as dishwashers. They start to pay off their debt to people back home or to people in the US that sponsor them. And they are extremely, just as you said, they're spending so much money sending money home that they can't make savings happen in the United States. And I think that just what you all said about that really resonated. And I think the second thing in financial health is that financial services aren't really helpful until other fundamental conditions are in place. So on the rights level, the right to work, and if it's not even a de jure right, it's a de facto right, because a lot of places don't have a legal right to work, but the authorities are turning a blind eye. The right to open a business, the right to move around. Those rights have to be in place before we can expect people to start really earning an income worthy of financial services. And on the services side, they need documentation. That's so hard to get. They need transportation. Women, especially women, need childcare support. And another thing that everybody is begging for is they want help in expanding their networks. And not just their networks with their own country of origin people. They know them and they know how to find them. They want networks with people that are in the host community. And that's come across every single country we've done research in. And then I would say in terms of the landscape not changing, Kenya is a great example. As you know, Kenya has one of the most runaway successes in mobile money of any country in the world, because they were lucky enough to have Safaricom have 84% market share when it launched. So it just completely controls the market. It's everywhere. Now, refugees and migrants, Somali migrants, would love to access M-Pesa, but they cannot. They're not allowed to for any kind of service. Instead, WFP has something called Bamba Chakula, which is a piece of M-Pesa, but it's only a food voucher. So I would just end with saying that people want the mainstream products that are proven in the host community markets. And they don't necessarily want special products for them. They want access to the products that are proven and successful and that other people have access to. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. I think the context of the forced displacement really has to focus on the initial stage first before getting to that the financial tools and others, and that we see that perhaps for some of more vulnerable migrants case, and that has to be addressed first. Aileen, over to you.
Thank you so much. I fully agree with everything that Kimberly has just said. There are urgent, immediate, enduring issues that migrant workers and their families all over the world continue to struggle with. Poverty, shocks, the ability to repay debt. All of those remain very important, and digital financial solutions, innovations probably not top of mind. Having said that, let me acknowledge what others might have been saying about the changing landscape in which we find ourselves. And once again, flag that that's not all of it, echoing what Kimberly said. But at the same time, ask, with this changing landscape, are there new opportunities that arise as a way to address some of those enduring issues? Okay. So I'm going to say what others might have already said during the course of this two-day conference, that one thing that has certainly changed quite a bit in terms of the financial landscape is the rapid increase in the share of digital remittances. Okay, some of this transformation from analog or traditional transfers to digital remittance transfers has been going on for a while pre-COVID. Some of it likely accelerated and made more urgent by the pandemic and the lockdown, and because people simply could not walk to the nearest bank or the nearest MTO. Last night, one of my former students sent me a new report on remittances produced by the Visa Economic Empowerment Institute. I understand that that's the research policy center of Visa, the credit card company. And I read the report, and their estimates suggest that digital remittances have risen from about 10% of all remittances, that would be circa 2018, to now about 34%. That's through the second quarter of 2022. Now, some of us might think these are welcome developments for many reasons. Digital remittances are safer, they're cheaper, they're more secure. It makes sense with a pandemic that's still around. It opens new possibilities for engagement, and we can think about that a bit more later. We can brainstorm. However, I would like to flag a couple of things to caution that there are still significant challenges ahead, right? Despite the rapid increase in digital remittances, even if Visa estimates are correct, that's only a third of all remittances. So that would suggest that something like globally $366 billion are still in traditional form. And of the third that are digital, most of it still digitally initiated, but not end-to-end digital. So it's digitally initiated and then withdrawn as cash somewhere. Okay. Second, and this draws on the work of Leora Clapper and the Global Findex project, worldwide about 1.5 billion adults are still unbanked. So this echoes what Kimberly said. We don't want anything special. I think that's what we're hearing. We just want access to what others have, right? So together, this tells us that there are tremendous new opportunities for digital solutions, but let us not forget, as I think you yourself said, Aiko, in the way you wrote up the conference intro, let us not forget the lived experience of millions of workers still sending remittances through traditional means. Okay, back to you, Aiko.
Thank you, Erwin. Your citation on the digital remittance is something that we are also quite keen to follow up, whether also that sustains after the COVID, because people do switch, but they might find that because the end users are cash, it might be as well just cheaper to send cash anyway, because you get a lot of, you need to pay a lot of commission to cash at the end. So that's something that we also are very keen to follow up in our project. Around in our upcoming project. My second question, we still because our intention is really to see even some of the low tech or the very mundane technology being helpful for the day of migrants in managing their fund. Do you see, area or the aspect do you see that are especially in the world of financial health or management, where areas that are particularly suited for some of the set of digital technology in promoting their well-being? Do you see some success cases, even addressing some of the fundamental vulnerabilities of the migrant workers? Maybe this one I go over to you, Aileen, first, and Kimberly next.
Okay, thank you, Aiko. So this is going to be a biased view, right? You asked me, what aspects might be specially suited to the set of new digital technologies for promoting well-being. This is a biased view. I'm going to circle back to that EduPay project that I described earlier, right? So EduPay, remember what I shared earlier, parents migrant parents from the Philippines in Europe wanted to make sure their remittances were being used for their children's education. So we created a facility to help them called EduPay. In the literature, this is often referred to as like migrant oversight. Parents would like to make sure that the remittances that are being sent to pay for their children's tuition are really used as intended. I noticed that in the more recent literature, this is referred to as labeled remittances or for-purpose remittances. And they make a distinction between for-purpose remittance, that is to say, I remit something and somehow I convey that that's supposed to be for tuition. So that draws from the behavioral economics literature, like it's a nudge. You're telling people that's not for anything else, that's for tuition. And so they make a distinction between just for-purpose remittance and something that they call for-purpose remittance with enforcement, right? And that is to say, it's not just saying this is for tuition, I'm sending it directly to the school. Okay, so this is the literature that we were trying to contribute to some 10 years ago when we piloted this. I'm going to digress a bit and add a footnote and say, by the way, what I took away from this experience is that maybe our role as development practitioners is to listen rather than to tell people what to do, which we're not really good at anyway. In this case, parents wanted their children to go to school. So then our team reflected on that and we said, what can we do to best help them make that happen? So out of Europe, how do we make sure that the money is being spent on education? Now, at the time we piloted it, 10 years ago, it was a very different world, technologically speaking. So the way we set it up, it was mostly analog. So people showed up at the BPI branch, they signed up to be part of this pilot. And then here's something that's interesting. At that time, we created an information flow back to the parents. So that is to say, these are reports on whether their children were attending classes, what their grades were through that semester and so on. And at that time, it was still mostly analog. The migrant workers actually had to go to the BPI branch to print out these grades and these school reports. Now, with the changing landscape, with greater internet access, mobile phones, smartphones, Android phones becoming more common, I think the possibility for providing real-time information is much greater. As an example, I should preface this by saying my child is listening to me now, I think. As an example, here where I am, I actually know how my child is doing in school. I know his grades in real time. I know whether he submitted his homework or not. As a parent, I appreciate it. Not sure if he does. Anyway, but I think the new technologies allow for like EduPay Part 2 that maybe would even be more feasible, that's cheaper, that's faster, that's more real time. So that's what I meant about this might open up other new possibilities for doing new things or revisiting what we did in analog form, but maybe in a better way. There's more I'd like to share on that point, but I'll stop. I'll pause right here and over to you, Kimberly or Aiko.
You're on mute, Kimberly, if you.
I would love to learn more about your project, Erwin. It sounds like it's evolved and it sounds like it's really robust now. So I would have to point to the obvious on this question of what's suited to digital, which is the world of humanitarian cash assistance has really changed. It used to be, as you all know, throwing food off the back of a truck. And it's now evolved into something that most international NGOs and certainly the UN agencies and many governments, many governments are promoting both for their own host populations as well as for migrants and refugees. And this has a notable effect on people's financial health. I mean, it's pretty obvious, right? If you receive an income stream, a set of grants that come to you, it's going to make a difference. So that maybe has been the most dramatic change in the last 10 years of technology and humanitarian assistance. Where it falls short is in its predictability. So often these agencies, you probably have all seen this, will get a grant for 3 years and be able to supply people with a decent wage as they're waiting to find their own work. But then what happens, and I think Colombia is a great example of this, the country of Colombia actually is very pro-Venezuelan migrant. And they have a special 10-year visa, if you can get it. In other words, it's available to everyone, but actually navigating the bureaucracy is quite a challenge. That allows you to get cash assistance. It allows you to enroll your children in school. It allows you to access the national healthcare system, which isn't that great, but at least you can get your medicines from it. It allows you to work. And it allows the NGOs to distribute you cash assistance. The problem is the predictability of the grants. So the NGOs or the UN agencies are receiving this money, and then all of a sudden it stops. And even though people are told save, 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 because one day this is going to stop, they hit a financial cliff, and they haven't been able to get enough cash assistance to actually save enough to be productive after it stops. So there's a lot of work left to be done there in terms of how that cash assistance is parsed out. But it definitely has had a huge impact on people's financial well-being.
Thank you so much. Now we have come across, from your website or even from the economic literature about this impact evaluation of cash transfer targeting a displaced population, because those are fairly easy to monitor, no? But the differences in the outcome are just so surprising that one paper praising this cash transfer to death, while others said it's a short-term lived, even if the transfer was 10 years. So how perhaps, in the ADB, what we're promoting is what we call a graduation approach, where you have to have some predictability on when it ends, and you have to prepare for it. Whereas if it cuts, immediately, it would just go back to the stage 0. So this emerging evidence on the cash transfer is particularly also interesting phenomenon to observe, where we have very inconclusive evidence, and that the fact that it made it to a digital cash transfer also have a possibility of some alienation. That, okay, here is the money, we will transfer you. We will no longer have face-to-face communication with you to monitor you or to have a discussion with you. So that again, then, pose another issue of community integrations and so on. Everything is now cash-based. So that might have some implication there. Okay, so I would go into the final question, but also encourage audience to pose question if you have any on the panelists. I will be taking those questions after this final question. So do write your questions on the chat box, or I think it's also possible to raise hand so please do so. So our last question to the panelists before we go to Q&A is about the multi-stakeholder coordination. We saw that the technology does have good potential, especially with the much faster speed of the development, but also that give us a bit of a divide between the service providers or the solution providers and the migrants and the people that has been working to enhance financial empowerment of the migrants. So how did you see any good multi-stakeholder development in this initiative? And as a development bank, we're thinking those are the kind of initiatives that we should perhaps also be spearheading. But how do you see this multi-stakeholder collaboration being done? And that if you have some good experience, it'd be great for us to share. I don't know if which one of you would like to go first on this one. Aileen, go ahead.
Oh, no, sorry. I was gesturing towards Kimberly, if Kimberly would like to go first.
I was gesturing towards you. I'm happy to offer 2 examples, but I really, really appreciate what you were saying, Aiko, about the predictability, because actually this has the same element in it. So one is the confusing messaging. So I'm going back to your last question or comment, which is people, you can ask 5 people on the streets of Medellin, and they will get that have received cash assistance. And if you ask them when is their last transfer, they'll give you 5 different answers because they don't know. And so that this confusing messaging and allowing people to plan, we've just got to get better at it. And that's also true in some of these multi-stakeholder examples. So I'd like to bring 2 to mind. One is in Mexico, in Tijuana. The municipality, the banks, and the maquilas. So the maquilas are the factories that a lot of migrants, Haitian migrants and Central American migrants get work in. And those factories supply steady jobs. And so there was a very successful multi-stakeholder partnership between the banks and municipality, even the shelters who are helping people find the jobs in the maquilas. So in a way, four-part. And the banks would actually go to the factory floor and sign people up because that was the only way they could get paid, because the factories didn't want to deal with cash. And they wanted to be able to load in the transfers on a monthly basis and get it right into people's bank accounts. Well, it was a great example. It was very successful until it stopped. It stopped because of confusion around the documentation that people needed to actually get the bank account. So really everything to me seems to go back to documentation. I mean, it's a very unsexy idea to talk about documentation, but without it, there's just so much you can't do. So anyway, even during the course of our research there, it stopped. So, which was, I think, most unfortunate. And a good example is what's happening here in our backyard in Boston. The city of Boston and some of the NGOs and the banks and the state of Massachusetts and the local rotating savings clubs have come together on many levels to promote financial inclusion using high-tech means, using traditional banking, using the savings clubs, and a span of services that go beyond financial services that are digital. And I won't analyze what each stakeholder does, but they are constantly meeting and working very closely together. And I'm very delighted that Tufts is a part of it. But it seems to be having a lot of traction.
Okay, thank you. So it's not a particular project or collaboration that I'm going to highlight, but instead it's a center. It's a research center in Africa that I think is doing very fascinating work. The center is called CENFRI, CENFRI. So they've been doing a lot of work piloting new approaches to innovative use of remittances. So for example, reflecting on the experience with EduPay, I've always thought, if we could help direct remittances to invest in education. And in fact, even 10 years ago when we started EduPay, already there were migrant workers who said, I would love to participate, not because I have kids in school, but I would like to provide scholarships to kids from my hometown. So I thought that was interesting because, in fact, that brings us closer to what I think we're trying to do in development work. It brings us closer to the ability to mobilize remittances to promote development more broadly, rather than just promoting the well-being, privately of individuals through within household transfers. Anyway, so CENFRI is doing some really interesting work and they're piloting this effort to direct remittances to health insurance and life insurance. Now, in the spirit of brainstorming, which I think partly this session is about, Aiko, I would say, why not extend that? So I'm completely freelancing now. I have no idea how to set this up, but why not extend that idea to begin to think about, let's say, portable social protection? So let's think of unemployment insurance savings accounts, for example. Imagine savings account that you pay into while you're in the host country. And then that's something you can draw funds from. If, God forbid, you lose your job, you might think that this is something that a host country would welcome. It eases the social tensions associated with the job losses during an economic shock. You might think that this is something the sending country might welcome because often, as we know, migrant workers fall through the cracks. We could think, so there's not a lot of experience in general with unemployment insurance savings accounts, but Chile has a related experience. And if I'm remembering correctly, something like every month, 4% of the pay is deposited directly to the savings account. And you can only use that, if you lose your job. And if you never lose your job, you get all the amount upon retirement. It seems to be, providing all the right incentives if you read the literature on it, right? So workers internalize the cost of unemployment, you digitize the benefits, employers contribute to these funds. You could set it up that way. And I was thinking about this while I was listening to Professor Sujata, Professor Visaria, her point about, can we think of other financial services? There's discipline, which then allows you to respond to some of these social obligations. Sorry, I can't lend you money because 4% already goes directly. I can't even touch it. It's not a choice I made. It's not a commitment savings I signed up for, but something that my employer is depositing directly to a fund. Is there flexibility? Well, yes, a particular kind of shock. So to Kimberly's point, everyone's still struggling with with shocks and how to cope with shocks. Well, this is a particular kind of shock. It's the shock of joblessness. Anyway, just sharing that for brainstorming purposes.
I think it's a fantastic idea. And it makes me think of a program, a product in India around pensions that was extremely cleverly designed, that allowed people to start borrowing partway through their savings process. And in fact, it served in a way as a form of insurance. But I think that sounds great. And I'm also a great fan of Senfreeze. In fact, there's a wonderful report that they have that I think it's called Lost in the Mail. I don't know if you've seen that. And it's kind of about the absurdity of trying to go digital and kind of over engineering a digital solution when frankly things were fine as they were. But I really like those folks, but I really like your idea in exploring how we can have insurance built in and make it, as you say, not voluntary, because then they have to explain why, why they're, having this money triaged in a different way than it normally would be.
Thank you.
I think, are you based in DC?
I'm based in DC, yes.
Okay, great. Maybe we can have a conversation. I'm based.
Yes.
There's a new project emerging. Great. And I think health seems to be something that really makes this financial health a lot in harm in some of the countries. We see this sudden health expenditure as something that is really troublesome, and also life-threatening incidents, and that ADB is actually supporting some border health project in Cambodia. So in our new project, we're hoping to look at this idea of health insurance that are leveraging remittances or the way that migrant works, because they will be utilizing health in both sides. But at this moment, it's the employer's contribution that is going to give basic health. So there is no how do you say? There is no commitment from the workers, and there is no immediate health insurance that also covers the families it's just him or her in that country. So I think that that idea of having a broader insurance might be useful. The issue about unemployment in the Asian context is a little bit more tricky because people tend to get dispelled as soon as they're unemployed. So that the disclaiming at the point of being dismissed is a bit tricky, and that's something that maybe interested to look at. But when it comes to health, which apply to both sides, I think those are feasible. So maybe perhaps we can also discuss further. It's very interesting. I was wondering, since this was related to Sujata, if she had any first question to ask to the panelists.
Thank you, Aiko. I think that's a fantastic idea, Erwin. I just want to share a little bit. So when I was with the cooperative, we had this idea precisely that employers could contribute to a pension fund for their domestic workers. And we even tried to package it as sort of, in Hong Kong, employers often give them a Chinese New Year bonus. And so instead of giving them that bonus in cash, you could create this, we called it gift to savings program. But an issue with domestic workers, and I think this will be true not just in Hong Kong, but in the rest of the world as well, is that the employers are these households. So it's not one large employer where you can just mandate something like this. And in Hong Kong, especially, I mean, I would love to hear what other people who are in the attendees panel as well have to say, but working with employers, there are agencies like, for example, Enrich and Fair Employment Agency that have connections with employers, but these are often those employers who are, if you would like, a little bit more socially oriented, socially minded. But it's never been easy to work with employers directly. And so I wonder if the way to approach something like this needs to be different, in that maybe it needs to be mandated, maybe it needs to be at the time of signing the contract. I wonder if you have any thoughts on this, or if there's any work that has been done in this direction.
I'm not aware of work done in this direction, but reflecting on what you said just now, then I would think making this mandatory in a way makes things easier, right? To your point about the social obligations, that especially becomes important. Just making this automatic every time there's pay, and drawing from the work of Leora Clapper, whenever it's a direct deposit, then that just makes things a lot more secure, a lot more private. And in the case from her work, direct deposit among female workers actually led to more efficient financial choices being made, right? As they acquired more autonomy in the use of these funds. So making this mandatory, making this direct, much more, regular and predictable and so on, I think those would work. Now, what kind of institutional setting might help make that work? It might probably have to be in the context of like a BLA, bilateral labor agreement. Maybe there's an economic partnership agreement where some of these matching processes and search processes are fairly centralized, right? So I have in mind something like South Korea's EPS system, where manufacturing companies actually register, and so who they are, the workers that they are hiring in the end out of a pool of possible workers. Having a process like that in place and an umbrella bilateral labor agreement, I think just makes things a little easier. But to your point, this is a lot more difficult when it's decentralized, when we're talking about individual employers. I mean, yes, I can see how that's very challenging. Okay, back to you, Sujata or Aiko or Kimberly.
Thank you. If there's no follow-up question, maybe I take a question that comes from the floor. So maybe this relates to Erwin's earlier report from the visa report, that even though the take-up of the digital channel of remittances have gone up, it's uncertain as to whether it would sustain. What do you think are the key factor that this sustained level of digital finance would be, or perhaps what is your view on that, and what are your prospects as you see?
Yeah, I'm not sure about, so some of this, as I said, grew out of necessity during the pandemic. You simply couldn't do this in person. You couldn't, there was very limited mobility, so you had to find a way to transfer. There's constant turnover of workers, right? So people go on a 3-year contract and then they return home. There's no guarantee that those 30% or 34%, those are the same people who would be there year in and year out. So as people take on new contracts, as there's a fresh batch of circular workers, right? Some of these dynamics might change. And I think that the other point I was trying to make earlier is, although this is, it looks like there's been a significant increase from 10% to more or less to 34%, through second quarter of 2022, a large part of this is still, just partly digital. It's digitally initiated, but still cash on the other end. And, that also still leaves 2/3 that are cash.
Thank you. I hope that answers your question, Kijin. I do not yet see a question from the floor. So I actually have one question to Kimberly. So in looking at your website, you were able to set a very good, well-minded group who are focusing to, address financial health of this displaced population, not just in a particular area, but around the world. And in Asia, where we are just currently looking at initiatives such as this to bring together some of the like-minded group, researchers, practitioners, to really share knowledge and cascade the learning together. This is just one step forward. What is your experience bringing such a multi-stakeholder toward and sort of drive the process of knowledge sharing and infusing research, but to the practice? Perhaps you could share with us some of the learning and the tips as we also embark on similar journey. Thank you.
Well, I think that would be hugely popular because in 2020, or actually it was 2021, we were able to get the Alliance for Financial Inclusion, Queen Maxima's groups at the UN. I forget exactly, it's a very long, complicated name. The German Ministry of Economic Cooperation, and a number of other stakeholders, and the Global Partnership for Financial Inclusion was also very active. And they were sort of ready to move away from just financial services and into looking at financial health and more of the outcome indicators. I think you would get a lot of people excited about this because ours was a small conference, by design. It was kind of our stakeholder group. But I think you could have something much broader with lots of people participating. And I'd be happy to brainstorm with you offline on this at some point if you'd like to do that.
Sure. But what type of activity were sort of the lineup that you have done? Is it like conferences, or you had a mini group, or?
Yeah, so in this particular case, we haven't gotten back to in-person conferences. We're about to do that now. We don't wear masks anymore at school, and we're going to kind of go back to that. But things had been online, and they had been basically talking about our findings and then asking people to respond to the findings. Different kinds of groups of people. We had some innovators in digital. I don't know if you know Leaf Global FinTech. I find them a very interesting company. They're looking into cross-border remittances that can go in any currency, and that can also be stored and saved. So that means the regulators have to get involved, but they've had a couple of successful pilots. So we had private sector folks, and we had tons of policymakers, and we've just basically been meeting informally when we can. But I think if you're thinking of something kind of broader that you want to do, you could do, bi-monthly meetings, and I think you get a lot of engagement. Or you could have a big virtual conference. or something in between. I think people are really ready for it. I think 4 years ago when we started talking about it, people were like, no, it's about financial inclusion. That's all it's about. But I think now it's really different.
You're muted, Aiko. We can't hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Maybe I can also invite the question from the speakers. If there is any, you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask a question to the panelists. Okay.
There was one point, sorry, Aiko, that
Yeah,
I
I
think,
see. Yeah.
no, I just want to actually raise something that came up in the Q&A, which I think is worth exploring while we are still here. And hopefully if Bradley is from Migrasia, so if and Empower You, it would be lovely if we could have him introduce himself, in fact, but now I need to figure out. There he go. Okay, so I can allow you to talk, Bradley. I don't know how to promote you into the panel, but I can click a button that says allow you to talk. And then maybe you raised this issue about a follow-up sharing session. So I would really like to hear more about what you had in mind.
And please introduce yourself to the audience. Thank you.
There he is.
Okay, thank you. Hi. I put on a hat because I'm working from home. Hold on, let me turn that. Oh, and a bad camera angle as well. Okay. Hi everyone. So sorry, Sujata, can you ask the question again? I was trying to figure out the tech on this as you were.
So you raised a question in the Q&A. One of the things you said was, could somebody collect sample training materials from the organizations and share with participants? So I'm really happy to try and look into that and see what it is that organizations would be willing to share. And we're happy to host that on our website, for example, if it's publicly available. But then you also said a follow-up sharing session. If there is interest, I'm just wondering if there are particular things you'd like to have discussed in that sharing, or what it was that you had in mind. Oh, and
Yeah,
also
thank you.
do please introduce yourself. I'm sorry, because I know you, but I'm not sure if others do.
Yeah, hi everyone. I don't think I've met anybody here, so nice to meet you. My name is Bradley Aaron. I am the Executive Director of Empower You. Hi. And we are the education arm of an organization that is a charity, classified as a charity here in Hong Kong that serves migrant domestic workers. Empower You does education programs both for migrant domestic workers, but also for local, what the government calls ethnic minority youth. Those are our two big programs, and we do hybrid online, offline education. And we've been around since 2018 as an organization, although we started in 2014 as sort of an informal thing on the campus of the University of Hong Kong that served migrant domestic workers. So yeah, I was just sending in the anonymous messages or whatever, wherever it goes into the ether. So thanks for bringing that up. I would love to be involved if anyone else is interested in a sharing session of just materials as to what people find is effective, what isn't. I think we all share the same goals here, which are not just about financial literacy, as we were talking about broadening this out to the more holistic approach that we also use at Empower You, where we teach in 5 key areas, which are technology, business and finance, where financial literacy goes, health and law. And then we also do a 5th one that's focused around leadership, which is more of kind of a practicum. But yeah, we would be very interested in just seeing what other people have found is working, what isn't, especially in this new sort of online, offline world that everyone was trying to figure out because of the pandemic. We started a little earlier because HKU was closed down in 2019 due to the protest. And so we had to pivot earlier. That was before I joined. And we're sticking with that hybrid model. So I think it would just be nice to see what other people have found is the most effective. So we can just make sure that our impact is like maximized as we're doing this, rather than all trying to reinvent the wheel. And then as far as sharing sessions go, we'd be very happy to participate in something locally at Hong Kong or something regionally, either organized online or in person, even now that we can move around. I don't know if that's something that people are interested in. I know carbon footprints are always a big thing, but people are eager to get out of Hong Kong, especially. But yeah, we have a sort of increasingly large staff here. And so it would be great to get them involved as well, and also connecting with our students on the migrant domestic worker side.
Thank you. I personally have an interest in a follow-up session around, just even how can we do a broader study of trying to understand what goes on in terms of the financial journeys of migrant workers. This is something that has been a pet peeve of mine. It's been, I think, 10 years that I've been trying to collect data from domestic workers in Hong Kong, and just even the first step of how do you recruit them into your study, how do you get a representative sample, has been a tough nut to crack, and it's taken many years to come up with one model that works, but clearly does not give us a representative sample even so. And I know that there are, I think, for example, there are so many organizations in Hong Kong that work with migrant workers that are interested in understanding their situations better. And it's not just financial health, it's more broadly, I think their empowerment is of interest to all of us. So that, given that we're ICO, thanks to ICO, the ADB is launching this new project where we are hoping to collect data and do better analysis. I think that would be something of interest to bring together partners who are all interested in the same general goals, so that we can at least start by having a more comprehensive picture of what the lay of the land is, perhaps, and then we can, go from there and try out different things that we can test. I think the EduPay idea is a really good one, and it's simple in what it is doing, right? But you can think of how big the impact of something like that could be if, as a result of that, children are more likely to complete school, and so on. But health is another one. I think the pension, creating this unemployment insurance or a pension fund is a fantastic idea. If people have connections with employers or have ways to connect to employers or to mandate, right? So I think it needs, maybe policy is the way to go on that. I have to agree with what Erwin was saying on that one as well. And I wonder if together that something can be created that would be a force to push in that direction, I suppose, is the best I can say, given the Hong Kong government's attitude towards domestic workers. Yes.
Let me just say, happy to join. If you think useful, happy to join a future brainstorming session. I'm not making this up, Sujata. I have like talking points, and one of my talking points was supposed to be, could we have like a financial diary among migrant workers? I think you had cited Jonathan Murdoch earlier. It's like, so these are exactly the questions I've been thinking about. What do we know about when people save, how much they save, how do they actually save, right? What's the equivalent from what we've seen among agricultural households? What's the equivalent of a micro saving in the lived experience of a migrant worker? In some of the work that I did with Michael Clemens, looking at migrant workers from the Philippines going to South Korea under this EPS arrangement, I remember that in our conversations with households, what we found echoes what our colleagues have said earlier. In the first few years of migrant work, many of them are actually repaying their debts, the debts that they incurred prior to departure. And so they can't even really think about savings at that point, at least in that particular context. So then the question is, when does saving actually begin to take place? And I think that one of the major papers in this literature on financial literacy training among migrant workers is the 2014 paper in the Journal of Development Economics by Doi and others, based on the work done in Indonesia. The key insight there, as you recall, you have to train both the migrants and the households. That's this same insight that echoes what our colleagues in Atikha and ILO were saying earlier. But if you read the fine print in that paper, they actually say the other thing that they found was it has to be a teachable moment.
Yes. Yes.
And when is that teachable moment? They said it's right before the household receives its first ever remittance inflow. What we learned when we were doing the financial literacy training through the PDOS, some of us thought that the pre-departure orientation seminar is probably not the best time to do this. Because imagine what it's like for the worker. Some of them have just moved from the province to Manila. They're overwhelmed. That's what we were hearing. They're leaving their families for the first time. They're going to a new country. They're learning all these things about the culture. And then on top of it, you give them a lecture on interest rates, right? That's really not the best time.
This exact thing came up yesterday, exactly this. So there was this discussion about teachable moment. When is the teachable moment? And Ju Yong Jang, who has done some work in South Korea, said exactly what you're just saying, which is that maybe that's not the right time. But she was suggesting wait a few months after they've arrived in the destination. But the other point that people are making is that if you only train one side, then the other side gets left behind. And I think the key thing for all of us that we all agree on, I think, is to think of the migration as a joint venture of both sides, right? And so leaving one side behind, or, you know, just not having them in sync is going to be a problem when it comes to financial health, because ultimately most of the money, a lot of the money is being remitted home, because we don't have the product, I don't think, in the destination country for them. I mean, there are these accounts where they might be saving, but there is a limit. At least my research suggests there's a limit on how much they can use that. But I think these are excellent points. I just want to, I think we have a couple of questions, but also I know that Gloria Wong, Camu Wong also raised her hand for a moment. So just want to highlight that.
Okay, now we see, 3 questions coming up. So yeah.
Hi everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I'm the research assistant of the Center of Economic Policy at HKUST. Actually, I have a question regarding to Catherine Laws for the first presentation. Wait, I've typed my questions. So I would like to know for the financial literacy program that launched by the International Labor Union, is there any research to measure the effectiveness of this financial literacy program? And for the presentation, there are 141 migrant workers in Singapore. They have received the similar program. So is there any behavioral change after attending the program? Is that the loan rate have decreased? Because why I'm considering this, because as Professor Visaria mentioned in her presentation, it is quite common and easy for the migrant workers in Hong Kong to borrow money. And some of them may just leave their debts to the employer. For example, they may renew a contract, usually it's 24 months. And after renewing a contract, they may borrow the money and then leave Hong Kong suddenly. So the debts they borrow will be left over to the employers in Hong Kong. So I think if the financial literacy program is effective, I think it will be great to launch in Hong Kong. And I think throughout the workshop, these 2 days, apart from focusing on teaching the migrant workers, I think it's also crucial and important to teach the migrant workers' families in their hometown knowledge on the budgeting or financial planning, etc. Because the reason for the migrant workers to borrow money, I think most of them is for their families' expenditure. So that I think budgeting or financial planning knowledge is also crucial for the families in Philippines or Indonesia. Yes.
Thank you. Kath, are you there to answer the question?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you very much for that question. And so first, so the question on how we already done studies on whether, on like a longitudinal study on whether, the behaviors of the migrants have changed. And to be honest, we haven't quite done that yet. And it's something of interest. We've actually been discussing this with ICO on maybe, partnering in the coming years on whether we could, work together in tracking down some of the migrant workers and their families who participate in our training. So that's certainly something that we we would like to pursue in the near future. And, of course, besides ADB, Aiko, I hope you don't mind, like I would extend, other institutions who would be willing to partner with us to look at that. But that said, so so part of what we're doing now with Atikha is that, like, as we mentioned, long-term mentorships for these organizations in the different countries which we were working with. And so we're integrating this into programs of MRCs. So they're our long-term partners who are located in the communities. And so we hope through these mentorships that we have these participants become part of the different migrant associations and active members or networks of these MRCs. So we hope to be able to see some changes there, at least. And so, but in addition, so we don't want to leave them with just the financial education. So Atikha also has what they call Pinoy Wise, for example, which is then a network of graduates of these financial literacy programs who are then linked, as you rightly mentioned, linked migrant workers to economic and financial institutions, economic opportunities back home. So in that sense, we could explore that. I think it makes sense to explore that a little. I mean, looking into these graduates and how they're actually then using their savings in channeling them towards a productive investment. So just to say, yeah, we don't have the study yet, but it would be good to document these changes.
Thank you, Kat. Does that answer your questions, Kim? And we have another question from Nurika, who would like to learn more about the most effective way in engaging with migrants' family more systematically, so that the empowerment not only on the migrant side, but on the family side. Maybe if Aileen, you're there, perhaps this is the question very much to you, whether you were able to, what are the lessons on this successful engagement with the family members?
Yes, thank you so much for the question. In terms of successful engagement with the family members, it is important that we organize the family members left behind, not only the migrants, but also their family members left behind. So what we're doing in the Philippines is we're organizing them. We call them Pinoy Wise, Pinoy Worldwide Initiative on Investment, Savings, and Entrepreneurship. And through that organized group, we are also lodging the different programs and the other needs of the OFW. So just in case we need to tap them or vice versa, they need us, we can coordinate more for other activities and other concerns. And then that organizing of OFWs is not only at the municipal level, that is being federated at the provincial level. So at this point, we are doing that in several provinces that we are working with. We also have this kind of Facebook page for them and Facebook group chats so that we can continue the coordination.
Thank you. I think working on the family side definitely seem to need engagement from the organization or the group based in that area because of the remoteness and so on. And the networking and forming a group like this will be critical in engaging the family side. Since the time is sort of approaching towards the end, if any panelists or the attendants, guest speakers, Arwin, if you have any other urgent last moment claim to make. If not, then I very much thank all the participants for listening in and also contributing for this 2-day session. And thank you very much, Erwin, for your great sharing your long years of research and the knowledge, and even the new insight and the new ideas throwing into this like-minded group. Thank you very much. So what we hope to achieve together with University of Hong Kong Science and Technology through Sujata is really to improve academic side of the research is one of the important pillar where data is missing. We're hoping to do perhaps not as elaborate as the diary, but better understanding of the family and the migrant side, so that we have a comprehensive picture of how the decisions and the planning about the remittance are made. We very much know that it's only one-sided. However, we also come to know that there are some organizations who's already embarking on this. For example, in the Pacific, we are learning that now in the Pacific areas, they're really starting this diary-based, both two linked survey type to really understand how remittances are being sent or received or used using very dynamic Pacific channels of migration, meaning from Pacific Island to New Zealand or Australia mostly. So hopefully we learn from those experiences. Actually, ADB is part of those research nowadays. So hope to bring those learning to this region to enhance our understanding. And we have focused quite a bit on the Philippine side, but we also want to look at the another important stream of migration, which is in the Greater Mekong sub-region. So millions of workers are moving to Thailand, which are characterized more by informality, as Kelly has put in her comment. So that involves much more of the issue of documentation and informality, as Kimberly has discussed. And I think working on these two distinct channels, Philippine origin migration versus these cross-border, more informal, but great potential areas of intervention, we're hoping to make some contribution. Aside from the research, we're also very much interested in building a community of practice in this area. We have seen a lot of migrant advocacy being really strengthened in the region through the work of different NGOs, with the work of actually ILO and IOM, who have empowered many of the migrant organizations. So it's really, time to look into this financial well-being side of migration by bringing different stakeholders. I mean, the migrant organization who are working with the migrants to impart financial empowerment, technology solution providers, government, different stakeholders who can mobilize and learn and to bring and test different products where possible. So we are hoping to launch this new project, as we are mentioning, from sometime early next year. And that one of the objectives really is to organize this kind of regular forum where different learning can be shared, or that have a different platform of discussion. Now it's so much easy to organize these meetings online. So we're hoping to facilitate those processes. So we're very much looking forward to your continuing engagement with us, if it's okay with you. And that hope this would not be just one-off thing, but we foster and learn each other through different events. And thank you very much for your support, Bradley. And that what we hope to do is that we would continue to perhaps start with email, information sharing, and start developing some ideas. Sujata, if you have something to add, over to you.
No, thank you very much. I'm really, really happy with how much engagement we got on this. I want to thank Professor Tiongson also for your excellent remarks and discussion. I learned a lot from our discussion, and also Kimberly, who I think unfortunately had to leave early. And I want to thank the ADB, ICO in particular, but also everybody else. I can see that Beth is here as well for helping to organize this, and then all of our staff at the Center for Economic Policy as well. Thank you so much for coming to this.
Thank you so much. We'll be in touch. Thank you.
Thank you.